Hello everyone, RJ Conti here, and I will give everybody a couple minutes to join us. But I promised a live reading of the very first story I ever completed, which, truth be told, I promised the story Holly, which I wrote at age 14, and when I went looking for it in my old hard drive, I realized it wasn't there. I think I only at this point own a physical copy of that book, and it was probably up in my file cabinet. So before I was about to go run up and search for it there to read to you, I noticed scans of a story called Jean, and light bulb flashed like, oh wait, Holly wasn't my first book. I think that Holly is longer. It was a full novel length, I believe. Actually, I don't know the word count. It could have still been a short story. It felt long for me. But Jean was actually before that. Jean I actually wrote between ages 11 and 12, right around my 12th birthday. And so if I'm going to be honest and read to you the very first completed work that I wrote, it really should be Jean. And that I have accessible here right on my computer. So I think I'm going to go with that one instead. So sorry, you're not going to get the little Elsie Dinsmore knockoff. You're going to get Jean, which actually, Holly, the one I had first said I was going to do for you guys, Holly was more historical, which I ended up sticking with. And I wrote historical for some time. My very first published book, Dashwood Avenue, is a Christian historical mystery. But Jean, my very first book around my 12th birthday that I'm going to read to you today, is actually more reminiscent of what I write now and what I stuck with. So it is Christian, I guess you could call it issue-driven. There aren't a lot of issues in it. It's Christian contemporary. And it's interesting that that was actually my first work. And then I ended up spending a lot of my teen years reading historical and wanting to then write historical. But after publishing and writing my first historical novel, I then got married, got pregnant with my first child, and decided after kind of leaving the nest, becoming my own adult, getting married, having a baby, that issue-driven was really where my heart was at, not historical. The issue-driven world just kind of boomed at that point. Every other book in the library was on mental health, depression, bullying, teen issues, and I ate them up, but they always made me angry because at the end there was no Christ, there was no salvation, there was no counseling. It was just like, well, the guy now gets the girl, or he gets to know who he really is, or he becomes his real self, or whatnot. And so in reading these and really liking the deep psychological issues and spiritual issues, I was always incredibly frustrated by the ending. And it was then that I realized, I think my heart is here. I think I can write the ending that I want. And so Angel Lover came into being after that. I went under a brand new name so that my middle grade Christian historical readers wouldn't freak out like, what is this? Because it was a lot darker, and it deals with cutting, suicidal tendencies, obsession, lust, things like that. And salvation. It's got a salvation story in it. So that was kind of the switch there. So it's amusing to me that my first story actually was more Christian contemporary. So anyway, I'm going to do that one. Before I do, making sure I got my Diet Mountain Dew, stay hydrated, for reading out loud. Now, the interesting backstory on this, we had just moved from Texas to California when I was 11, and this is the first story I wrote there. I was always coming up with stories and writing stories down and typing stories down, but I hadn't really completed anything real until this point. And I think part of the move kind of made this story come about. I was happy to move to California. I was only 11 at that point. Moving had not gotten to be the torturous thing that it is to me now. I hate moving now. But at 11, life was all ahead of me, and California sounded exciting. I wanted to be an actress, and so I thought this was going to be my dream. I was going to get to go to California and be an actress, which of course did not happen. Although I was asked to be in a movie the very first week I was in California. I mean, is that not uncanny or what? I was asked to be in a TV show, I was kind of picked up, scouted. I was scouted at a Rite Aid getting ice cream. So, I mean, I just thought, oh man, God's answering all of my prayers. And my parents said, absolutely not. So there went that dream. So I think there's an aspect of being a lonely, I guess my character was 10 and I was 11, but being kind of a lonely kid. But the story itself, I think, is absolutely hilarious because none of it makes sense. None of it's realistic. Nobody would hire a 10-year-old to be an au pair or a nanny. I called a maidservant in here, which is even funnier. But I think it's reminiscent of, it was processing my feelings of being in a brand new place as a preteen. So that's the story of Jean. And so that's what I'm going to read to you guys today. The funny thing is, we had just been going to a new church, obviously, because we just moved to the area. And when I had it all finished, the only person, I forget how it came about, but somehow the pastor's son at our church there, his name was Nate Maddox, if any Maddoxes are watching this, he was considered really cool and popular. And for some reason, and I never really spoke to him, but for some reason, we must have had a conversation, I don't know if it was through our parents or what, where it had come out that I was a writer and had written my first book, my first story, and which it's so short, it would be considered a short story. But it has chapters, but I had written it and he was interested in reading it, which is bizarre because it's this goofy little thing about a 10-year-old girl, and that didn't strike me as typical of Nate Maddox. You know, he was more sporty. So for some reason, me being the bold, confident person that I was, I handed over my story. I printed it out and I brought it to him at church and handed it over. And then waited. And weeks went past and I heard nothing. And I was like, okay. And then we had a computer crash. So I completely lost the story. So panicking, I went back to Nate and I was like, because I had not really wanted to follow up and hear any negative feedback at that point, being only like newly turned 12. So I went back to Nate and I was like, do you still have my story? Because I haven't gotten it back from you and I need it because my computer crashed and I lost it. And he was like, oh, I threw it in the trash. I'll have to try to dig it out. So as a kid, that was like devastation. Like, he read it, said nothing, and threw it away. I was horrified. It's a good thing I didn't give up being a writer just then. So he went home and he and his mom dug it out of the trash and they found everything except the last chapter. So the last chapter is gone forever. And I came home with my poor precious disposed of baby, scanned it in and saved it and never looked at it again until now. So here we go. Chapter 1. I lifted my pencil. Dear Mom and Dad, I wrote, I like it here. Our prayers have been answered. My name is Jean Gray. I am 10 years old. This is my first year being the Mateo family's maidservant. Again, like, what kind of a plot? So this 10-year-old has not only been hired to be a maidservant, I was thinking of an au pair, I think, but she's living away from her family too, who are like in a different state, and she's writing them letters, like the whole, okay. Anyway, it started 3 years ago. My parents had almost no money, even though they both worked. I was too young to get a job. They looked into me becoming a mother's helper. I met the Mateos and they took me. They treat me like a sister and a daughter. Mrs. Mateo stressed to me the importance of being a good example to her children. She confessed that's why she hired me. And hired is in quotations, so like, is she not being paid? Like what? Jean, 7-year-old Carla interrupted my thoughts. Carla at first didn't like the new addition to her family. She didn't like me being the oldest. It took her some time to warm up to me. Okay, so I'm thinking what happened was is this family ditched Jean, right? And instead she's actually in foster care. But to keep up the lie, they've convinced her she's a maidservant and is getting paid back to her family. So, you know, I think maybe there's more subtle secrets here. Obviously, that was not what I was thinking when I wrote it, but, you know, I could spin it that way now. All right, back to the story. Coming, I answered. I put down my pencil and paper and stepped out the door of the bedroom that I shared with her. There stood 6-year-old Aaron and 4-year-old Benjamin along with Carla. Jeannie, you got a note, Aaron announced with a huge smile. He handed me the letter and I took it from him. Again, this is supposed to be contemporary. 1998. Why are there no phones? Thank you, I said politely. As the kids scattered about, I glanced at the return address. It was from Mom and Dad. Yeah, her abandoned, terrible parents. I ran into the bedroom and hastily pulled out the letter. Dear beloved Jean, I read out loud. Like, what is this, the 1800s? Yes, thank you, Sam. See, he agrees. I could turn this into a real story. Thank you. Dear beloved Jean, I read out loud. We terribly missed you and we hope that you like the new family you were staying with, the Mategos. They spelled it wrong. I read on and on about their life in Minnesota, where I was from originally. Wait a minute. Why are their parents telling her about their life in Minnesota as if she didn't live there? Like, maybe, actually, we could twist this that she's like a clone or something that was like developed and actually has no memory of her previous life, but has like false memories. Anyway, this could be better than it is. Here in Michigan, we seemed a million miles apart. So again, these people just transported their 10-year-old to Michigan. When I finished, I heard some giggling behind me and I realized that the children had listened the whole time. So why is Jean reading out loud? Unless she's like some sort of artificial robot thing that reading is new to her. Maybe she's some sort of like robot thing that the government's trying out and placing into families. Oh, we could totally twist this. Little subtle plug for artificial love there. They seem nice, Carla commented. Do you miss them? Aaron asked. Are you sad? Benjamin inquired. Oh boy, the dialogue tags. I shook my head at the last question. Mom says if you didn't already have parents, she'd adopt you. Foster things looking good. Carla giggled. In my heart, I knew I felt a twang of sadness. Twang? Yeah, I was living in, I just moved from Texas, so you gotta give me a break. But it felt good to be somewhere where people accepted you. That's the first chapter, guys. Page and a half. Chapter 2. I knew I was fortunate to have a Christian family to live with. The Matejos were Messianic Jewish and devout Christians. Okay. Already Carla and Aaron had confessed to know Christ as their savior. I had been a Christian since 2.5. That's like her author. And so I yearned for fellow believers. A cry brought me out of my thoughts. I know, I'm coming, I thought. I knew that cry. It was baby Hazel calling for me. I was specifically put in charge of 4-month-old Hazel since Carla was so young. I picked up the young baby and rested her on my knee. It was feeding time, so after changing her diaper, I brought her to Mrs. Matejo. What is the mom doing? Why does she need somebody to pick up and diaper her? Okay. Thank you, Jean, Mrs. Matejo said with a smile. She took Hazel and brought her into the sitting room to nurse. I smiled a "you're welcome" and went to the process of finishing writing my parents' letter. Jeannie, dear, Mrs. Matejo called. Yes, Mrs. Matejo, I answered as I walked to her sitting room. I was never going to finish that letter. Yeah, give the poor 10-year-old a break. My husband's birthday's in a week, and so I need to go shopping. Will you get the kids ready to go, please? She asked. Yes, ma'am, I replied. Come, Carla, Aaron, and Benjamin. It's time to go shopping for your daddy's birthday, I called. Oh my stars, so much repetition. Let's get to it. A series of whoops, hollers, and cheers filled the room as I got in their light jackets. He's turning 37, Carla giggled, as if any kid knows the exact age of their parents. That was totally, information that I wanted you, the reader, to know, so I had to stick in there. Carla giggled as she whispered her statement to me. She thought she was so big. Soon Mrs. Matejo had Hazel dressed and ready, and we were on our way to the mall. Jean, Benjamin asked, pulling at my coat. They should be glad I didn't mind their nicknames. This is all so boring, it makes slice of life anime exciting. Jean, I like that, Aaron announced. Jean. Oh, my stars. He kept saying it over and over again. Aaron, you interrupted me, Benjamin screamed. Benjamin, be quiet, Carla whispered harshly. Wait just a minute, I commanded. Benjamin was talking. Go ahead, Benjamin. Benjamin sighed in relief. Okay, so any good editor would have just kept this whole chapter. When's your daddy's birthday, he asked. June 2nd, I answered, as if she wouldn't really know, because she's like a robot clone thing, right? All of a sudden, as if out of the blue, Aaron blurted, Jean, when are you leaving? A silence hung over the car for a few seconds. Okay, now the plot's thickening. And after thinking it over, I replied, I really don't know. Can you stay forever and ever? It's nicer here, isn't it? Don't you like us? Questions were hurled at me without warning. Just a minute, I commanded again. I'll stay as long as God wants me to stay. Or Big Brother, the government. That seemed to satisfy them. I tapped each of their noses with my index finger, and all their faces lit up in smiles. Well, Jean is, like, awfully nurturing. Chapter 3. I promise you, like, it's almost done. I picked up Hazel and carried her for Mrs. Mateo. Now let me see, what would Noah like, Mrs. Mateo said to herself. The kids looked around at this and that and wanted to go into every toy shop. It was hard watching 4 young children, and Mrs. Mateo soon insisted that she carry Hazel for me so it wouldn't be such a burden. I didn't argue. I put Benjamin on my shoulders and held Carla and Aaron's hands. They whined when they couldn't go in every toy store, so I bought them each a candy stick to occupy them. So wait, where is this 10-year-old getting money, and why is she having to buy the kids candy sticks? Like, there is so much neglect here, I don't even know. Thank you, Jean, Mrs. Mateo whispered gratefully. I nodded. She seemed to be always thanking me. Yeah, because you deserve it, you poor child. That's why they call me a mother's helper. Oh, my stars. Can you tell I was the oldest of 4 kids? After a lot of thought, Mrs. Mateo picked out a tie, a suit, and some sunglasses. Oh, he's in the Secret Service. We hurried home. A storm looked like it was brewing, and while we were driving, rain started to pour down. Okay, here's where we come to my twist and my action, and it is hilarious. Okay, a storm looked like it was brewing, and while we were driving, rain started to pour down. Jean, I'm scared. Benjamin curled up to me on the seat. Why is Benjamin not in a car seat? Aaron had already curled up on my other side, and Carla had curled up to him, so lots of curling going on without car seats. So at this point, I think the Mateos are just just neglected people. Like, this is a terrible situation. They're probably in it for the foster care money. Yes, Sam. I love it. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, what a dichotomy here. Like, okay, you can buy them candy sticks and do all the care, but I'm not going to let you hold Hazel. Or yes, she holds Hazel, yes. Okay. I put my arms around them and sang a song. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things on earth will go strangely dim in the light of his wonder and grace. So at this point, this is not a typical 10-year-old. This is a robot. Because, like, what? I sang that a couple times, and it seemed to soothe the children until we hit a big bump on the road. Mrs. Mateo screamed, the kids yelped, Hazel cried, and I prayed. She prayed, okay? The car went flying into the air from a big bump. The car went flying. So definitely we know we're in some sort of like dystopian, speculative society, right? Okay? Because the car's now flying. I jumped up, unbuckling Hazel and the kids in a flash. What? So the car is in the air. She jumps up, and now suddenly they are buckled. I guess in regular cars, regular buckles. I ripped open the car door in amazing speed and pushed the children out. It's a robot going bad. It's like Hal here, going bad. I jumped out and we started running far away from the car. The car landed. The car landed and pieces flew in every direction. Okay. So they're driving, right? They hit a bump in the rain. The car goes flying in the air, like sci-fi style. While the car is in the air, in like slow-mo, she jumps out, unbuckles the kiddos, throws open the door, and throws them out, and they somehow survive, and then the car lands. Okay. What? The car landed, and pieces flew in every direction. But no pieces of children, just pieces of car. The loud bang that it made could be heard for miles. How does she know? Nobody knows. Suddenly she has a different POV, an omniscient POV. It started to light up in flames. Wow, this is some bump. It started to light up in flames, but because of the pouring rain, it was soon extinguished. Okay. Suddenly it hit me. Where was Mrs. Mateo? This is so dark. I rushed back to the rubble and tried to open what I thought was the driver's door. I picked up a big piece of the car and broke the window. Again, this is a robot. Like, really. A 10-year-old would be, yeah. There sat Mrs. Mateo, the car crushing her. I ripped off her seatbelt and yanked her out. Okay, now we know this is a cyborg. Wow. Then I started screaming and crying, help, somebody help. I saw no one was coming and administered CPR. Of course, because it's programmed in her, right? Because she's really a metallic Hulk and doesn't realize it. The kids were starting to come back. No, stay there, don't move, I shouted orders. I ran back into the car and picked up the cell phone. Wait a minute, suddenly there are cell phones? Why is she writing letters to her parents? I think her parents don't It had avoided destruction. Wow, what? It had avoided destruction. Okay. Thank you, Lord, I thought. I opened the thing and punched in 911. Hello, came the answer. Yes, I have someone who had a car crash. Come quickly. We're on Redline Street. Okay. Watch out for the big bump. Watch out, or your car is going to go flying and burst into flames too. Then we hung up. I sat with the kids and prayed until I heard sirens in the distance. So, this is the last chapter that I have, I believe, because I lost that last chapter in the trash. And it's chapter 4, and the Roman numerals are I. So that's not even the correct IV Roman numeral. I showed the doctors Mrs. Mateo, and they shook their heads sadly, lifting her into their ambulance on a stretcher. We gladly climbed in. Did anyone be like, wow, what is this 10-year-old doing? We gladly climbed in the car when they offered us a ride and drove speedily to the hospital. We sat in the waiting room and the kids didn't make a peep. They were still in shock about what had happened. Yeah, and being thrown out of a flying car. Maybe they're all cyborgs too. They were still, I sat there with tears running down my face, praying earnestly to the Lord of Heaven for Mrs. Mateo's life. Mr. Mateo was notified immediately, and he hurriedly drove to the hospital. It's all my fault, I cried in anguish when he came in the door. I got the children out, but I thought she would get out herself. Yes, he says, because that's why we got a cyborg, so that you would be able to rescue them slow-mo, mid-motion, when your car hits a bump. So clearly he's got to complain about her defective, faulty wiring here, because, I mean, why didn't she get the mom out too? Like, what? I got the children out, but I thought she would get out herself. That's all I wanted you to do. If you hadn't done what you have done, all my children would have been, he stumbled on the last word, dead. Mr. Mateo, can I see you, please? A nurse called. You come too, Jean, he commanded. Why are they asking the 10-year-old to come? And they're just leaving the other little kids. We walked into a small room and sat around a table. The doctor walked in. I'm sorry to be blunt, Noah. How does he know this guy's first name? I'm sorry to be blunt, Noah, but your wife is seriously injured. She broke both of her ribs, a leg, and an arm. She has a hard time breathing also. I don't think she'll survive the night. It's so ominous. Oh, dear God, help us, Mr. Mateo earnestly pleaded. My tears started to fall again. Thank you, doctor, he mumbled as we left the room. Oh, my dear Elizabeth, he cried over and over again. Now we're in like a soap opera. Elizabeth, you can't leave me. Oh, God of our fathers, please save my wife. Like, what? Who says that in the middle of great Yeah, okay. I couldn't hold it back anymore, and I burst out sobbing. Finally, I asked him, should we tell the kids? Again, why is this 10-year-old being consulted? He shook his head no. Mr. Mateo drove us home, but stayed the night with his wife at the hospital. I sat up. I couldn't get to sleep. I just decided to pray. Early in the morning, we got the call. I dreaded what the answer would be. My voice shook as I answered it. Yes? Jean, is that you? Mr. Mateo asked, so I guess he left her with the kids overnight. I couldn't tell if he was happy or sad. Yes, she lived, was all he could say. I shouted. Hip, hip, hooray. Mr. Mateo... Mr. Mateo saying hip, hip, hooray. Mr. Mateo was happy, except he was too tired to say anything else, except that it would take some time to accept. Mr. Mateo was happy, except he was too tired to say anything else, except that it would take some time for her to heal. I knew that it would, and I was willing to help. And really, the last chapter is not a big deal. It's just her writing a letter to her parents to tell them about it. But anyway, that is the story I wrote when I was 11, turning 12. So now you have read Jean. And we now have theories and fan theories about how she's probably a cyborg from the government who's been convinced to think she's a mother's helper and 10 years old. Yeah, I think we got a better story brewing in here. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. I want to remind you that if you want to read a current and prayerfully better written short story that I wrote just a few months ago, The Tears of the Emperor is coming out here very soon. I have completed, I hope, edits, at least the first round of edits, and it'll be coming out with the Beatitudes and Woes anthology through Bear Publications, and it is a very dear to my heart story about an emperor who has been told that the very first time he cries, his tears have magical powers to cleanse the island from evil, which could mean anything from death to receiving more sacred texts. But his big concern is his sister is a prodigal, and is not walking with God. And so he is very afraid of when he will have to do this. So my story is written on Blessed Are They That Mourn, and it's very meaningful and special to me. Came in right at 10,000 words, and kind of more of a literary and historical yet supernatural feel to it. So I hope you will enjoy that one. I cried through the whole thing. And it was really fun and really special to write. So anyway, thanks for tuning in and listening to such a crazy atrocity. Thanks for laughing with me and listening to my crazy fanfic theories on my own writing. And I get keep up the good work, all of you guys who are writers. It's fun to see how far we've come, and if I can come from writing stuff like that, then you guys know you're on the path to doing great things. All right, bye.